The blood on her scrubs had not yet dried when the 6 men were wheeled into the trauma bay, and not one doctor in that hospital believed she could save them. Nurse Elena Marsh had been called many things in her 11 years at Coastal Grace Medical Center: too slow, too soft, too old-fashioned for a trauma unit that prized speed over gentleness. The younger residents rolled their eyes when she took an extra 30 seconds to speak calmly to a frightened patient. The attending physicians whispered that she belonged in hospice care, not in the chaos of the ER, where hesitation could cost a life. She had heard the mockery so many times that she no longer flinched at it. She simply kept working, kept showing up, kept believing that her hands were good for something even when no one else did. That night, the storm outside matched the storm inside the hospital walls. 6 Navy SEALs had been brought in after a training exercise gone catastrophically wrong somewhere off the coast: an equipment failure, a collapsed structure, injuries so severe that 3 separate ambulances and a medevac helicopter had been required to get them all to Coastal Grace in time. The moment they arrived, the ER erupted into controlled chaos. Doctors shouted orders. Nurses ran between beds. Machines beeped in overlapping urgency, a symphony of fear and adrenaline that filled every hallway. Elena was assigned to the quietest, most overlooked task: monitoring vitals in the recovery corridor while the real trauma team worked on the 2 most critical patients. It was, in the eyes of her superiors, a job for someone who wasn't sharp enough for the front line. She swallowed the insult the way she always did, and got to work anyway. But something happened in that corridor that no one expected. One of the SEALs, a broad-shouldered man named Jason Reyes, began seizing on the gurney, his oxygen levels plummeting as panic spread among the junior staff nearby. The senior doctors were buried in the operating room with the other patients, and for a terrifying moment, no one in the corridor knew what to do. Elena did. She had spent years quietly studying every emergency protocol, not because anyone asked her to, but because she refused to be caught unprepared, even if no one believed she would ever be trusted with a real crisis. She moved with a calm precision that startled everyone watching, stabilizing his airway, adjusting his position, speaking to him in a low steady voice even as he thrashed beneath her hands. When the attending finally rushed in minutes later, Reyes's vitals had already begun to climb back toward safety. Word spread quickly through the unit, though not everyone was ready to admit what they had seen. Some of the younger nurses murmured that it was luck. One doctor said dismissively that anyone could have done the same thing under pressure. Elena said nothing in her own defense. She simply returned to her patients, one after another, treating each of the 6 wounded men not as statistics or headlines, but as human beings who were terrified and in pain, farm boys and city kids who had signed up to protect a country that, in that moment, could offer them nothing but a hospital bed and the hope that someone competent was watching over them. As the night wore into early morning, the situation shifted in a way no one could have predicted. The 2 most critical patients, the ones the senior surgeons had focused all their energy on, began to stabilize under the primary team's care. But the other 4, the ones assigned to Elena's quiet corridor, faced complications no one had anticipated: internal bleeding that the imaging had missed, a dangerous drop in blood pressure, and one man whose heart stopped for 11 agonizing seconds before Elena's steady hands and calm instructions to the code team brought him back. Through it all, she never raised her voice. She never displayed fear. She simply worked, hour after hour, refusing to let exhaustion or the weight of 6 lives in her hands slow her down. By dawn, something extraordinary had happened. All 6 SEALs were alive. Word moved through the hospital like wildfire, and for the first time in over a decade, the same doctors who had mocked Elena for being too slow, too soft, too sentimental for trauma medicine, stood outside the recovery room in stunned silence. But it wasn't the doctors' opinions that mattered most in that moment. It was what happened 3 days later, when the men were finally well enough to speak. One by one, as Elena made her rounds, the 6 wounded warriors asked for her by name. Jason Reyes, the one who had seized in the corridor, reached for her hand as she checked his monitors and told her, in a voice still raw from the ventilator, that he remembered her voice cutting through the chaos like the only steady thing in the world, and that he believed it was her calm, not luck, that had kept him breathing. Another, a quiet young man named Marcus who had lost his brother in the same accident that nearly claimed his own life, held her hand and simply wept, telling her that in his most frightened moment, hers were the only hands he trusted. One after another, the men who had spent their lives trained to endure unimaginable hardship, men who rarely showed vulnerability to anyone, asked if she would be the one to continue their care, refusing to let any other nurse near them unless Elena was present. If this story is moving you the way it moved us to write it, take a moment now to like this video, drop a comment below, share it with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to Midnight Tales if you believe in kindness, in quiet strength, and in the power of second chances. The hospital administration, once so quick to overlook her, could no longer ignore what had happened. Elena Marsh, the nurse once mocked for being too slow and too soft, was given a formal commendation, and more importantly, she was finally trusted with the kind of critical cases she had always known, deep down, she was capable of handling. But for Elena, the real reward was not the recognition or the apology from the same doctors who once doubted her. It was watching 6 young men, who had gone through hell and back, slowly heal, not just their bodies, but the fear in their eyes, because someone had finally treated them with the patience and humanity they deserved. Months later, when the SEALs were discharged and prepared to return to their units, all 6 of them returned to the hospital one final time, not for treatment, but to see her. They stood in the same corridor where she had once worked in obscurity, and this time, in front of doctors and nurses and administrators who had once dismissed her, they thanked her, not with medals or formal words, but with something far more powerful, their presence, their gratitude, and the simple truth that her gentle hands had given them a second chance at life. If this story touched your heart even a little, if it reminded you that kindness is never wasted and that the quiet ones often carry the greatest strength, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who might need to hear it today. Before you go, we have one small request. Comment the word hands below if you believe that gentleness and strength can exist in the very same person. And to everyone watching, remember this: the world will not always recognize your worth right away, but that does not mean your worth isn't real. Sometimes the very people who once mocked you will one day be the ones who need you the most.